one ring, more like the 459 ring.
Next on Eternal Dirtles. Hello and welcome to Eternal Dirtles. I'm your host, Zach Clark, and with me as always, Phil Bleckman. Phil, how's it going, man?
Yo, what's going on, dude? I have received my Altered Council's deliberation.
Oh,
so
yeah. They're pretty.
All the people telling me,
we're gonna share
Phil, your take on Bowmasters is trash. Phil, Narset exists. Hull Breacher exists.
Phil,
the One Ring
Zach.
exists and it's just better. I'm drawing cards. I'm gonna lose doing it, but I'm gonna draw some cards, and I'm not gonna be dissuaded otherwise.
I think, So we just recorded the Bowmasters episode, and that was a secret hit. Like, I was really surprised that people were that adamant about either side of that debate. So we wanted to take it down a notch and just talk about the One Ring.
Take it down a notch. I'm not interested in I'm trying to go. I'm trying to go up to 11, Zach.
Yeah, I think
all the feedback that I got on people being like, Phil, your take on Bowmasters is trash, and I'm like, guys, literally every take I've ever had has been trash. But like, am I wrong? Am I wrong though? Though? I'm just the guy in the hot dog outfit trying to find out who did this, guys.
Yeah, I think your favorite 80s song is "All I Need Is a Miracle," right, by Mike and the Mechanics.
Bro, like I do think it is funny that it is true that we are still very much in the early stages of Bowmaster, and it was definitely getting a lot of heat. I was remarking on our last episode, for those who haven't listened to it yet, that it's good in literally everything. Like it's good in every shell that you'd want it in: combo, aggro, control, mid-range combo, mid-range control, mid-range tempo, whatever. Like, it is just good everywhere. Because it is flashable and there's no part of that card that is soft. Yeah. So I was like, maybe in design, maybe all cards shouldn't do all of the things all the time in every archetype. Maybe that's just not good, theoretically. But turns out everybody was like, Phil, how could you say that Bowmasters needs to get banned? I was like, I never said it needed to get banned. I don't think it should get banned. I think it's totally fine. I just think that, like, it's maybe not all great. There is some downside.
They say using all of the buffalo. I think they use all the cardboard for that one.
Literally all the cardboard.
Every part of the cardboard.
It was one of those things where it's like any part of the card they could have like tweaked slightly to make it so that it wasn't good in actual everything at all times. Like, it's good early, it's good late, it's good in every archetype. The splash is easy, but like, hey, it brings black into the foray as a fair color, and we're seeing the fruits of that. And we're going to talk about another card today that is starting to find its way into some legacy shells. People are experimenting with it. Obviously, Bowmasters has taken the brunt of the post Lord of the Rings release into Legacy as like the new card du jour. And it's been popping up everywhere. It's been having results. It's going to be with us for a long time, controlling a lot of tables. But today we're going to talk One Ring and the spots where it has shown up. And, the spots where I think I guess we're going to talk about where it's going to exist in homes long term, and then where it's sort of just been a flash in the pan as people experiment. Yeah. But
I think we would be remiss if we didn't say how much this card saw play in the Modern Pro Tour at Barcelona.
It did.
The only reason that deck that the One Ring isn't being widely considered by everybody in the sphere of the Modern format for banning is just because Calcano didn't take home the trophy. Like, if those cards shuffled up slightly differently, everyone would be like, "Yo, this card's got to go." There's a problem, and there are plenty of people talking about that. But to that end, it's a very powerful card, and I think that it behooves us to look further, dig deeper into Legacy because of how much power this card's seen in Modern.
Yeah, I've seen talk about Ring getting banned, and anybody who I was with, anybody who I was with in at the Baltimore. What was the Baltimore event we went to? It wasn't an SCG.
That was SCG Baltimore.
Oh, it was SCG Baltimore. Yeah. Anybody at SCG Baltimore can tell you I was singing the praises of the One Ring and about how crazy that card is going to be, and it has proven itself in Modern objectively. And there was talk that it's going to get banned in Modern. I think that knowing that there's going to be an additional Lord of the Rings release with a couple of new cards in the fall, I think they said there was a Magic release video about where they said
November,
their future.
Yeah, there will
late
be
November, so
a holiday offering.
0% chance that they ban a card from the Lord of the Rings
Not
set
the marquee
before
card
the next
of the set. Come on.
the marquee card of the set before they release new product during the holiday season when they just had a down quarter. Get the fuck out of here.
Yeah,
no chance they ban that card. I mean, should it be banned? Maybe, probably. Will anybody miss it? Probably not. You know, it's
and
probably
we're talking
good to
about
not.
should it, and maybe will it be banned in Modern? No one cares about Modern that much. I have to say, I don't like the amount that people care about Legacy, and if they think Bowmasters is going to get banned in Legacy on today is Monday as this is coming out, but we're recording Saturday, so like if people think that they're going to ban Bowmasters on Monday, they're out of their minds. Wizards does not care enough to hurt their profit margin on a widely it is the second most sold set ever. They're not going to hurt their chances.
It's on its way to becoming the most sold set. It's been out for like less than a month.
Yeah, so they're just slowly working on having that become the best set that's ever happened for Magic. They're not going to ban anything from it in any format, no matter how one-sided that format becomes until after it's out of print.
Also, 0% chance that Bowmasters gets the axe in Legacy.
Zero.
Not a shot.
Zero.
Actual factual zero. They're not going to touch Legacy at the ban. This comes out on this is going to come out on Monday. Yeah.
Yeah, and this will come out probably a couple hours after the ban announcement.
So we're going to see Legacy will go entirely untouched. I can't imagine that they decide to move anything or move anything off the ban list.
Modern.
But that's the thing. Like I think that in Modern, now I'm not a Modern aficionado by any means, but I've seen more talk about unbannings in Modern than bannings in Modern. Yeah. So as much talk as there has been about getting rid of One Ring, that's not going to happen. It's too close to home in terms of like the set release. But in terms of cards coming off the ban list, I mean, I don't know Modern well enough, but I've seen a lot of talk about people wanting, Splinter Twins. Sure, Splinter Twins probably fine. It's not a turn 4 format anymore. That whole thing that they set up went out the door immediately when they printed Modern Horizons. Yeah. But I've seen some people clamoring for Birthing Pod to come unbanned, and just imagine if let's say you were playing Legacy, right? And on Monday they were like Survival of the Fittest is unbanned in Legacy. Would you lose your mind? Would we all lose our minds? Is it probably fine, or is it probably this is a problem now?
I'd be like, I'm only upset about this because it's so expensive. Please reprint it.
I think there's probably something to be said that it is too powerful to have a card that puts your entire deck in your hands guaranteed every turn. And it's somewhat different where close things are like Green Sun Zenith, but you have to use Green Sun Zenith and then you have to draw another copy.
Yeah.
You untap with Birthing Pod or Survival of the Fittest every turn. So the idea that for 2 mana in terms of survival or 3 mana for Birthing Pod, you just get to have access to your entire deck every turn. I mean, imagine if every card in your deck was a fetch land. But instead, you could get threats
this is not necessarily a why we should or shouldn't ban survival episode, but I just don't ban or unban survival, I should say. But I just don't think that it's on the power level of a deck that would be playing survival is as powerful as any deck playing show and tell.
I imagine that our understanding of not having gone too deep into what a current iteration of survival looks like is probably a limiting factor on our creativity to break it. I think if we devoted ourselves for 2 weeks to even come up with anything close to resembling what a Legacy survival fittest deck would look like.
It's very legal in Vintage, people are out there doing things with it.
But the way that the incentives in Vintage are just so much different from the incentives in Legacy.
True.
The difference between all of that fast mana, the aggro decks in that format are bizarre and actual factual hardcore as souped up initiative as you can get. Where the closest thing to that in Legacy right now is as an aggro deck is probably still initiative and maybe some form of Grixis tempo.
Yeah.
Right. It's just not they're just not the same playing fields. That format still has Dreadheart Arcanist and Oko and Ragavan all as legal as 4-ofs if you want them. Oath is in that format. The way the things that you have to combat in the format are just starkly different.
Yeah.
You also have to dedicate 9 sideboard cards at minimum to Bazaar alone. All that being said, unban Library of Alexandria in Legacy, you fucking cowards. I'm ready to draw up to 8 cards, my guy.
Look, my unban this, you cowards, is Mana Drain. Come on.
Oh yeah. But that see, the thing is that
actually,
if you do, If you unban mana drain, I'm not even going to be like, "Oh, good job on you. You figured it out." No. There's no risk to mana drain.
Well,
There's
there
a
is
risk
now.
a little
The One
bit.
Ring exists.
Get out of here. I think the difference of the power level in modern One Ring versus Legacy One Ring is Legacy One Ring. There's a bunch of ways that you can interact with it in ways that are more powerful than you can necessarily in modern. So in Legacy, you like have like in the control decks, Narset is everywhere, Bowmasters is everywhere, Pithing Needle is in every single Urza Saga deck.
Yeah.
If you need to point stuff at actual hard permanent removal, you have ways to, like, literally I was playing Unexpectedly Absent this past week. Like, these are just even off the beaten path cards like that are just not available in modern. The closest things that you have in that format is stuff like Leyline Binding,
and you have to be playing a 5-color deck.
But even then, it's like if you're sorcery speeding your prismatic ending, that's one thing. But like the premier removal in that format outside of, I guess, prismatic ending is Leyline Binding, and Leyline Binding is a permanent, which means that opposing Teferis bounce it, opposing Leyline Bindings catch opposing Leyline Bindings, and so the ring just flips back onto the table and then just restarts itself. Where it's in Legacy, it's just I think a lot easier to get rid of, because you have access to a bunch of other cards, and you also have free counter magic. Like there's no you have Force of Negation in Modern, but that's not necessarily playable in every deck. Where you actually have a blue base in Legacy that can support a bunch of other decks, and so you just have access to more counter magic and ways to catch it on the stack that isn't available in Modern. I think the One Ring is a lot more tame in Legacy. Now, don't get me wrong. Of the 4 drops that you can play, it is probably outclassed only by Minsc and Boo. And I think that's only because it doesn't affect the board. Like it lets you untap because you have protection for a turn. But the fact that like Minsc and Boo, if you're in the colors to cast it, lets you attack down opposing planeswalkers. It lets you clock. It's also card advantage. Like the ring lets you draw 3 cards after you've untapped with it, even though you are untouchable for a turn, right? Because you tap it once when you cast, after you've cast it, and then you untap, take a damage, and then draw 2 more, so you've ancestraled. Whereas if you untap with Minsc and then sack the Boo, that's 4 cards. Yeah. So, like, I think on rate, Minsc is just a far ways ahead of the ring. But the One Ring is colorless, and so it can fit into a bunch more homes. And particularly in Ancient Tomb homes, granted the trade-off of life, but, like, I think that there's enough ways to... Yeah, go ahead.
I think that's a good preamble for, talking about the decks that it's seeing play in. Because one of the first decks we want to talk about is like 4-color control.
Yeah, and specifically, even more so about, even though the One Ring is in 4-color control, or, I mean, in some numbers, I actually think the big innovation to 4-color control is Delighted Halfling. Because, like, way more so than the Ring. I think, the Ring is just taking the limelight away from Delighted Halfling, which is actually the star player that's been added out of the set for 4-color control. And I think I had an epiphany recently. So... I'm the Miracle guy. I never leave the archetype because I'm dedicated to it, and I refuse to let it go because it's a constant puzzle that I'm trying to solve. But I've recently adopted playtesting days in Miracles to see how it would play. And when I say Miracles, I mean like counterbalance, control the top of my deck Miracles. And what I found is, days wasn't always good, but there were spots where it shined and saved me games that I otherwise lose. And I'm still testing it out, I'm still playing things. But it's not that the power level of days is what has surprised me in testing with it outside of a Wasteland deck. The thing that has surprised me about it is it lets me interact through development in ways that no other cards would. And the format, I feel like, has sped up in such a way that if you aren't able to interact sooner, and by sooner, I mean like a full turn cycle faster than what we're used to a year ago, that you just get steamrolled and then are on the back foot until the game is over, and you just are trying to recoup for the lost time. And it's where cards that don't affect the board, that classic cards like Predict and stuff like that. And I think that's where Predict failed in, post EI ban, is that it didn't affect the board and wasn't card selection, right? It's just raw cards, but you're trading time for raw cards. And that's time that the format, as it currently stands, just does not allow for. And so me testing out days, it wasn't that days was strong. It's getting to interact in development was strong. Like, I get to develop and interact. I have to do both simultaneously in order to not be on the back foot for the entirety of the game. And every other deck is just zooming way past development in ways that are really meaningful. Either through the fact that all of the threats in Delver are way more powerful than they used to be. They're not just vanilla creatures the way Delver is, where you're like, okay, my life total is under duress. No, it's like there is significant card advantage under duress that matters, because then you're going to be way too far behind. Similarly, all the Ancient Tomb decks are just built on the fact that they get to skip development.
That
right?
is
That's
the idea.
whole point. It's the whole point of Soul Lands. Urza Saga is, pound for pound way better than anything else in terms of like creating power plus answers and tutors and whatever. Like it speeds you through, like, so all of the Ancient Tomb Urza Saga decks speed through development. The Stompy decks are in that category as well. And so the control decks have to be able to interact faster than they used to. They can't just use their life total as a resource anymore. The games end a lot faster. And I think that for 4-color, adopting Delighted Halfling is essentially their means of being able to speed through development. So now they have a turn 1 play that lets them skip from 1 to 3. And by going from 1 to 3, and then Uro gets them up to 4 and 5. So now they're casting potentially 5 mana spells or 4 mana spells with backup on their turn 3.
And with Uro, it's Daze Protection too, because now you're casting Minskin Boo and you have that 5th land in play.
And so the combination between Delighted Halfling, Uro to make sure that, so like if they don't deal with the Delighted Halfling, the Uro is 100% going to get through on the stack, which means that it's at least going to convert a card, most likely a land drop, and blank an early combat step. And now we're in the range where you get to start slamming your snowbally haymakers that run away with the game by themselves if they're unchecked. And so you're not in a position where you're like forced to slam, get caught by free counter magic. Now you're way behind on tempo because they traded 0 mana for 3 to 4 mana, and you have to just claw back, and you may not have the proper card in the right sequence at the time, and you're not allotted the time to cantrip to find the right answer necessarily. So Delighted Halfling, not only speeding you through development, but then also letting you get to ignore the stack, means that the combination between that and Teferi Time Raveler really stresses your opponent's counter magic in ways where it's probably going to be dead for a majority of the time, because now you don't just have 4 ways to remove to blank their counter magic, you have 8. And then post board, how are you supposed? You are compelled to leave in your removal for Delighted Halfling if you expect to have your counter magic, if you're playing counter magic, interact with them on the stack at all. You can't let their Delighted Halfling stick, because it will just, for 1 mana, not only ramp them their mana, but also blank a card, which means that the Delighted Halfling not only got them through development, but also at least traded, because it blanked your counter magic, and that's significant, right? That is an inherent card advantage. So I think that, like, even though the deck is playing some number of the One Ring, the actual innovation is Delighted Halfling, and it's just not as flashy as One Ring is.
Yeah. Well, the funny thing is that Delighted Halfling lets you cast the One Ring with impunity too. Because it's legendary. Am I wrong here? Like it is legendary permanent, right?
It is legendary permanent. You can 100%
legendary
do that.
Spell. It's not even legendary permanent. It's legendary spell. So like if you want to cast Isildur's Fateful Strike, you can do that.
You can do that. Yeah.
So the interesting thing about the 4-color control deck that plays the One Ring is because Delighted Halfling is there, that this deck basically just completely puts the opponent on the back foot based off of, it's only this particular version we're looking at is only playing 1 Minskin Boo and 3 rings, but you've got 4th Erlingus as a kill card, and they're playing like a 1 of Terminus. And it looks like they're pretty much leaning pretty heavily on Uro as their final kill card. 4th, of course, is very good and probably does win them a lot of games. But this is pure value deck. This is the most this is the most like tap out control style deck that I think I've ever seen in the format.
I think like the more snowbally powerful cards we get like this, the more I find that it's sort of disingenuous to be calling these decks control.
Yeah, this is tap out mid range, right?
Yeah, it's really just like slamming the it's way closer in my mind to pile than it is to control. Like, it's just the best cards on rate, and then all those cards win the game by themselves if they're unanswered. Yeah. And as they're experimenting now with the One Ring, I mean, at a certain point, the One Ring has drawn enough cards. Like, if you untap with it twice, like, the game is just over. Like, you're up 6 cards. You know, your opponent still has to deal with the threat on the table, plus whatever has been developed after the fact.
Yeah,
like,
I mean, think about how many times...
coming back from that.
Think about how many times your opponent has had the Monarch for 2 turns, and you're like, I guess this is over.
If you untap twice with the one ring and then still have it on the table, imagine the number of times that your opponent has activated Grizzlebrand once and you've won.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, it just doesn't, that's just not the world that we live in, that you get to survive that kind of exchange, right? It's 6 cards for 3 life as opposed to 7 cards for 7 life. Either way, you're dead. And I think that like, I mean, it has imposed their decision making to include 4 Teferi so that they can bounce the One Ring and recast it if they need to, so they don't die to themselves, to their own ring. And then you're incentivized the same way that you're incentivized to play more Minskin Boo with more Minskin Boo. You're incentivized to play more One Rings with more One Rings, because you want to be able to cast the second to remove the first. In my view, depending on what the format is, if we were in a vacuum and if somebody asked me, hey Phil, how would you build 4-color control, or 4-color pile, whatever the deck name would be, I would start at 4 Minsk. I think that like I think Minsk on rate is the more versatile card, in that like it lets you take a more aggressive slant, and it draws more cards pound for pound than the One Ring does. And I think that Planeswalkers are more difficult to deal with than artifacts are. If you are casting them for the...
This is all of... They used all the cardboard here card, like...
I think it's just like... It's harder to deal with a Planeswalker in play. I get that you can attack it, but the fact that like One Ring can't remove opposing walkers. One Ring needs the follow-up in order to kill the opponent. Now, granted, you'll have all the resources in the world, but like Minsk doesn't ask anything else of you except mana, right? Yeah. One Ring can't actually kill the opponent by itself. Like, yes, in essence it is, but you actually do need the other thing that says I win. Hence, they're playing, at least a singleton Minsk, or they're playing the 4th Aerolingus, where it's like, okay, after I've drawn a bajillion cards, if you haven't conceded yet, I just have this, fat fireball sitting in my deck so I can close the door. But like, they do need the actual win condition in their deck to say I win the game on it.
Correct.
And I think that like Minsk doesn't ask you to do the second thing, but the fact that like Minsk getting to go in sequence, let's say if you Delighted Halfling into Uro, and now we're in the range where you just start slamming your 4-drops, you can go One Ring, draw into One Ring, and then just start snowballing advantage. That way you're 100% going to win the game. But if you go Halfling into Uro and then start Minsking them in back-to-back turns, Minsk hits them for 4, then hits them for 7, so they've taken 11. Second Minsk then sacks them, hits them for 7, and draws 7. Like,
it's over.
The sequence
whenever
of
that happens, it's bonkers. It's insane.
Bonkers, right? But like, it also asks there's no additional mana beyond casting the Minsks. And if you had the mana to cast it the first time around, you'll likely have, I don't know what could happen that you wouldn't have the mana to cast the second time around. And if you have Delighted Halfling, both of them would be uncounterable unless they deal with the Halfling. And if they're dealing with the Halfling, it means that they're not dealing with the blue that's killing them. And Minsk cares about being able to sack the hamster in order to draw cards. And if you dealt them 4, 7, and then an additional 7, so you've dealt them 18. If they're somehow not dead, then you've also Grizzlebranded, and that cost you no life.
Yeah,
I just think that like pound for pound, like Modern doesn't have Minskin Boo in the format. If it did, I don't know if everybody would be clamoring around the ring as heavily as they would. I think they would just be playing Minskin Boo.
I mean, we were one of the first people to call, and this was back when the set first came out. Everyone was just down on the set, and I was like, I don't know, man, Minsk looks good. I think, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think even you were like, you just bolt this card, like we
remember thinking
this.
I would have to go back, because I remember when the card was spoiled, I couldn't believe that they printed another card that was just like a recursive free threat every turn that then also drew a bunch of cards.
I think your exact words were
and was removal. I think I didn't calibrate that like Uro players would just adopt it. I think, but I do remember being like, man, I do recall thinking to myself, I'm going to lose this card a lot. Because I was like, okay, so it's a recurring threat that is also removal and card draw all in one card, and asks nothing of you after the fact that you, other than casting it.
Yeah.
So the fact that it wasn't gated, I think I was like, I probably wasn't high enough on it to be like, oh, this is the most powerful walker in the format without Oko in it.
Yeah.
But I don't think I was totally off of it, because I was looking at it through the lens of a control player, thinking, how the fuck do I ever beat this card?
Yeah.
Which might have been different from other people looking at it and being like,
think you're,
if you're in Daze Wasteland Bolt territory, you're like, whatever, I'll daze it or I'll bolt it. It's a 4-drop and I don't give a shit. I'm doing things that are better than that is.
I mean, I think you're a good enough Magic player to when we're evaluating these sets, to not just evaluate them through the lens of, will this beat Miracles or not?
Yeah,
I'm sure of that.
I think like the stuff just stands out to me more. Like I'm acutely aware of like, oh, this is just recursive card draw for free. Like anytime something's not mana gated, it's like, oh fuck, man, like please just mana gate something, literally anything, please.
Yeah.
Or snowball. Like the fact that the boo was free every turn, but I remember there was we did distinctly talked about how there was because it was a walker with an ETB trigger that you could respond to, and I definitely remember thinking that was going to be a bigger deal than it actually is. Like the ETB on trigger on the stack, I feel like doesn't really come up as much for interacting with it. I think it just sticks and you get it in more often than not. And I remember thinking like, oh, it's a walker with an ETB. We haven't really ever found that before when you don't have the loyalty to activate to just get it out of bolt range. But it never really came to fruition that was a problem unless you were significantly on the back foot, in which case I don't think any 4-drop would have really saved you. So
yeah, I think oftentimes what happens is you're at that point of the game where like your opponent probably doesn't have a bolt in his hand anymore. He tried to bolt your halfling, or he bolted Teferi to get Teferi off the board. Or several other things.
That's something else that you just what you just remarked on. I remember, it's like, oh, or they bolted your halfling, and I know that some people had, when talking about the 4-colorless, we're talking. It's like, oh man, like halfling is sweet because it is totally degenerate to go halfling into Teferi, but they were like, but we don't really want to open ourselves up to removal, and I was like, well, you're opening yourself up to like the non-white removal, right? Because in if you're playing against Source of Plowshare is going to clip the Earl anyway, even if it's at a card down. It's mana positive. Yeah. So it's not like that is changing at all. But you are opening yourself up to Bolt and Fatal Push and the other stuff that you would otherwise not give a shit about. But I think in similar ways so back when Ragavan was in the format, I remember I sleeved up Ragavans in Control as just like it's a generically too powerful card not to play, right? Yeah. But what mattered was in other decks, people would protect it and then try and ride it to the win, right? It snowballs by itself. If you can protect it, it's probably worthwhile to do. Whereas every time anybody spent any amount of cardboard removing it from my side of the table, I was like, fucking great. And the reason for that is similar, again, back to the discussion about like how do we get through development. By having a 1-drop spell, it meant that any amount of whatever removal they were doing, they were trading at mana parity, and it was also then spending their time in their development to remove the Ragavan, which means that I got to effectively, I got an additional turn worth of time to develop because they wanted to deal with the Ragavan.
You cast a red mana Time Walk.
So I cast a 1-mana spell that bought me enough time to get through development to then where my deck could actually do the thing that I wanted it to do, but it needed the time to actually get to my 3rd land drop without being like so under so much pressure that it was insurmountable. And having a 1-drop play like that they were compelled them to answer, and if it didn't, then it just got you through development because it made the treasure. That was like really powerful. It was like if you don't answer it, it's like objectively too powerful, and I just get to make all this mana and get through my development anyway. And if you do deal with it, well, that just bought me a turn, and now I can get through the development. Now I actually get to play the game. And I think Halfling is going to has a similar effect. Like, is it bad when it trades for a removal spell? Sure, but like the whole function of your deck is I just want to start slamming 4-drops. Yeah. And if they spend their time using a resource to trade with your 1-mana resource, so you're trading at mana parity and just getting through development, that's fucking great for you because you're better in those positions when you have mana, and like when you have like enough mana to cast your action is just going to be better than anything else going on in the format. So like if we're at that stage in the game, that's where 4 colors should shine and like really close the door. So I think a Halfling inadvertently solves its own problem because of the deck that it's in. Yeah. For the reasons why you wouldn't want to play it in theory in abstract, because like the most fragile times for pile decks or control decks is the early game where they have to not die. Yeah. And then if they don't die, theoretically, if you have cards and mana, you should win the game. So I think delighted Halfling's here to stay.
Yeah, I think I think we spilled enough ink on this particular deck, but I think the Tildir here is Halfling is the power of this deck and not so much the One Ring. The One Ring is just like an additional payoff that's not necessary to make the deck great, but getting that buy a turn situation is great, but maybe this isn't the deck where the One Ring shines its brightest.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. I mean, the One Ring is very powerful, and like 100% is legacy power level for sure. Like without a doubt, like that's not a disputed point. I think in that particular archetype, Minsc and Boo is probably just better for what the deck wants to do. Even if you have room for a split, like in my view, I'm not adding One Ring until I'm at 4 Minsc and Boo. Okay. And then if I want more 4-drops, then I would add a ring. But I think Minsc is just like pound for pound the more powerful card in that shell and should be leaned on more than the ring. But I think the other archetypes that we're going to talk about, I think ring actually shines pretty.
One final point about what you just said, because I want to. I'm pretty sure every one of the decks that we're looking at has at least 3 One Rings in it, and I think that's the correct number if you're going to play any One Rings. I don't, especially if you can recur them somehow. I think you need to reasonably find ways to get rid of the One Ring with another One Ring, or if you're in a deck that recurs the One Ring with like Emery or something like that, you just want that consistency. I say all that to say this: the next one we're looking at is playing 4 One Rings, and it is Turbo SheoRIng. So it's a Sheoldred, the Apocalypse deck that plays the One Ring, and I think this is one of the more powerful versions of the One Ring archetype.
Yeah, I mean so there's a couple of things to be said about this list. It's it is a blue-black list. I mean, functionally, it's a mono-black list, right? I mean, it's playing blue for counter magic and the cantrip suite, but like beyond that, the only non-blue beyond counter magic and the cantrips, the only actual blue card that does anything is Brazen Borrower, and that's just as a catch-all because black can't remove.
Sometimes, sometimes you need,
you know. but I think in this deck it's playing like a bunch of shield. It's playing 3 Sheoldreds, and then it's playing all 4 One Ring. And on 7 1-drops, the difference that this deck is, the difference that this deck is using in order to get there is it's a 4 Dark Ritual deck and a 3 Chrome Mox deck.
Yeah, I mean, you can turn One Ring somebody. Not to mention, you could turn 1 Sheoldred and then follow it up with a One Ring.
And so it's in this shell where it's like, okay, I think this is more of what a One Ring home really should look like. And that's like all of the fast mana, like the fact that the ring is colorless and that it can be abused by fast mana. Like, I think looking at the One Ring as more in the lens of a Necro than of the lens of a Jace the Mind Sculptor is the more powerful lens to view it through. Because it's colorless and can be abused with shit like Dark Ritual and all of the fast mana, that getting that out earlier and then like just barreling cards, again, it's just blazing through development. The fast mana just gets it through development and slams the haymaker. Like, the entire format is just revolved around, like, we are not spending our time hitting our first 2 land drops. We are just out the gates the second the game starts. And this is just another example of that. And
I think an important point to make about all of these decks is all of them are skipping development in some way to make sure that they get the One Ring out.
Yes, yeah. I'm just saying that,
be it Ancient Tomb or Dark Ritual or Delighted Halfling.
I'm just saying that, like, the format as a whole, post Lord of the Rings, like, the one thing that seems to hold true across every deck that's like seeing success is that they're all skipping development in some meaningful way. Outside of like a couple of outliers that are, you know, like even the control decks, like, you know, Pile or whatever, have to adapt in some way to be faster, because all of the stuff hits a lot harder or accrues advantage a lot faster than before Lord of the Rings came out. Yeah. And this deck is falling into that same vein. 3 Chrome Mox, 4 Dark Ritual. It's on 3 Sheoldred with 4 with the One Ring. If you pair those together, I mean,
that's
Sheoldred,
you just get it. Like, you don't win the game, but you'll never lose the game to the One Ring.
Well, the thing is what we were talking about before, where like the One Ring compels you to have the second thing in your deck. Sheoldred is that second thing, but it also, while also being the thing that kills your opponent, simultaneously removes the drawback of the One Ring. So you just bury your opponent, and then all you have to do from that point is protect the Sheoldred. After you've drawn a bunch of cards, if they remove the ring, the Sheoldred's still the thing that's like de facto killing them.
Exactly.
The ring is just effectively killing them.
And chances are they have another Sheoldred by that point because they just drew like 7 cards. You know.
Either way, they have to remove both, and like. This is it's a 4 Force of Will, 2 Force of Negation, 2 Thoughtseize Grief deck that's also playing a Spell Pierce and a Drown in the Lock. Like, good fucking luck trying to get through any of that if like either of those threats have stuck. Now, granted, like, I'd rather see a Sheoldred across the table for me than the One Ring, because, you know, there's just more answers in the main board to a Sheoldred. But, you know, if you're playing a Karakas will remove it at no drawback. But like, any amount of removal that actually deals with it. I mean, I'm a Swords to Plowshares player, so like I don't fear it nearly as much as I do the One Ring. But I mean, This is
it's not what I want to see across the board from me as an 8-cast player for sure.
But I think like if you were to compare this One Ring deck versus the 4-color One Ring decks, this I think is just taking advantage of what the One Ring does faster. Like if you were to look at this deck, right? Just imagine that the One Ring was 4 Necropotents instead.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Right. Exactly. If you just look at that list and just swap those 2 cards out, you'd be like, oh, this deck would function identically the same. Right. Well, everything that's going on in this deck would be the same.
You wouldn't get the uptick in life from the Necropotents because you're not.
But you know what I'm saying. Like if Necropotents were unbanned and it showed up in this shell, I can't imagine that any of the 75 would really change. In the first month after it's unbanning. You know what I mean?
Funny. So we've been talking about this deck for the last 10 minutes, and we haven't even mentioned that they're playing for Bowmasters as well. Which is funny
if you're black, you're playing for Bowmasters.
Is the least interesting card in this deck, actually.
I think it's the least interesting card in that it doesn't do anything else with any of the other cards. It's just here on rate, like it's just the best card at 2 on rate.
Like you're going to want to play 4 because you're playing a black deck and it's cheaper than Shieldred, but it is basically your Shieldred's 4 through 7.
Yeah, it's just the best card on rate. It seems like the least interesting card because you can see every other card has a specific role in what the deck is trying to do between its 2 payoff 4-drops. So like Shieldred and One Ring are both supported by everything else in this deck.
Exactly.
The cantrips on your turn 1 ensure that you can stick one of them on turn 2. Your fast mana ensures that you can get them on turn 2. Your counter magic protects them. The Thoughtseize and the Disruption clears the way. Brazen Borrower is just a catch-all answer to, if your opponent resolves a turn 1 chalice, that you can remove it so you can actually play the game. So it's actually just a part of the disruption suite. Whereas Bowmasters isn't part of a disruption suite, it's just on rate. So it doesn't look like it's the flashiest card, but at the same time, it's like it fills out the rest of the deck. It's just
being a role player.
Yeah, and that's totally fine.
Yeah. All right. So
I think one thing that I want to quickly point out post board. I've been seeing a lot more of this, and I don't know if it's people are respecting Painter a lot more, but it has an Emrakul, the Eon's Throne, in the board. I'm seeing a lot of Emrakuls in the board these days, dude.
What is that from? What for against a deck that's going to mill you out?
Well, if you're playing against like this is a card that I have only ever played it in the board because I don't want to get milled. And if I'm getting Pain or Grindstone and I have this in my sideboard, they need to at that point, if you know that you have the Emrakul in the deck, then the only thing that you need to fight over is anything that could remove it when they mill you. And then if they can't,
surgical extraction and whatnot,
yeah. So it's like if you fight over, the Soul Guide Lantern or whatever their graveyard hate of choice is, if like you can fight over that between your counter magic and your discard spells, then they can never actually mill you, and you just cut off that access to win. And if you look at a combo deck and how to combat a combo deck, it's like all of these decks have the whatever handful of axes that they can actually win on. And a good way to combat those is you're like, if I know how I'm supposed to line up my cards to ensure that each axis that they could defeat me on is cut off, the classic example is, you playing against Storm, they have the Ad Nauseam line, they can Tutor Chain line, they have the Past in Flames line of old, right? And it's like if you cut off the graveyard, they can no longer Past in Flames. So they're now stuck to have to Tutor Chain or Ad Nauseam. If you start checking their life total, the Ad Nauseam line is cut off, and now they have to go through the graveyard or they have to Tutor Chain. If you ensure that they don't get off the ground and you disrupt their mana, then they can't Tutor Chain. They're going to have to get off an anemic Ad Nauseam or go through the graveyard. If you just knew that you're like, oh, these are the axes that I have to cut them off on, and if I can cut them off individually, then I can focus my other tools on the other 2 axes, and that's how you can attack those decks. This is a similar strategy where it's like, if I know the Emrakul's in my deck, then the mill line is shut off when we present our decks, and then all I need to do is focus my disruption on stuff that would interact with that, and then as long as I don't lose to the beatdown, and you have 3 Shieldred and a bunch of One Rings in your deck,
you should be
they're
okay.
not beating you down. Then you should be all right. Yeah.
It's pretty funny, just blanking like 8 cards out of a deck that is that combo deck. Let's talk about.
Don't get me wrong, like a Painter deck can beat an Emrakul. Like it's not the first time that it's had to do that, but
So let's talk about the Colorless combo, which was played at a 4-3 at the Buffalo Chicken Dip, but it's got some interesting cards like Patchwork Automaton. You're looking at Canaptech Scarab Swarm, which we don't see online ever because it's not online yet.
Mm-hmm. And that card is starting to like get recognized as an actual powerful spell, like swarming the board after like being both disruption against graveyard decks, and then also presenting like a bunch of lingering souls.
Just a ton,
like,
dude.
That's not nothing.
Yeah. And it, I don't exactly know what the combo is here, so I'm just kind of going through this deck. But this is a deck that's really only playing one ring, which is pretty wild.
Yeah, I think that like when you had sent me these lists, I was expecting like this is much closer to like a Steel Stompy looking list between a couple of Net Assist and Sculpting Steels. It has some disruption in Tangle Wire, but I feel like either this was an evolution of the Karn Mystic Forge deck, right? That initially was put together after the One Ring came out, or it's a departure from it where you can see that they started shaving on those pieces to take a more aggressive slant.
Yeah, it looks like they're going on that more like, they're not playing Ravager, but they have this more Ravager shops aspect of the deck than it is a combo deck.
Between Urza Saga and Foundry Inspector, like it's very clear that they're like and Lodestone Golem, like they're much closer to a Shopsy style deck where they're just trying to put very difficult thick beaters on the table. I mean, for Patrick Automaton is really a nod to that. Like,
I mean, Automaton is like, wow.
Yeah, when you're playing a 4 Ancient Tomb deck, I mean, it's got 3 City of Traders as well. So if we think about like if we're opening a 7 with this style of deck, you go turn 1 Patchwork. They are so far away from removing that card because of Ward 2 that it's going to chunk them for significant damage. Like you're a mono artifact deck. Like the entire deck. It's 21 lands,
like
what? And your turn 41 artifacts.
Your turn 1 is going to be this guy's at least a 3/3, right? Like
between you have all of the Mishra's, you have all the Mishra's baubles, you have Lotus Petals, some Mox Diamonds, a Mox Opal, like a bunch of singleton artifacts for the Urza Saga. If like beyond that, on your turn 2, you can just go Grim Monolith into Sphere of Resistance, and then they're tacked even further, and they're already getting hit for 4 off of that line. Like if you look at Patchwork as a 1-drop that they can never actually trade even on mana because of the ward, like Patchwork does a lot of work and it lets you get out to a really, really aggressive start. And then Foundry Inspector and Lodestone Golem just like follow up to continue to bring the beats. And then Urza Saga is the best card in the format. So this deck being an actual aggressive slant, the One Ring is more of like a nod to being a strong card than anything else. Like it's a way to recoup, but it's one thing that's not disruptive in this deck. But it does make me want to remark that the One Ring did develop the Mystic Forge Karn deck and explore that territory.
Yeah,
I think that this is like anybody who wanted to play that deck. I think this is actually the better option.
Yeah, I think that playing Tangle Wires and Patchwork Automatons just seems so sweet.
So right and considering this is 2 Tangle Wire, this isn't somebody. So this person isn't playing Tangle Wires to like lock you out of the game. This is Tangle Wire to time walk you twice and chunk you for 12.
Yeah, pretty good, pretty wild deck, man. I think this is a way smarter way to take the Karn Mystic Forge deck than the Karn Mystic Forge deck. The Karn Mystic Forge deck, in my mind, is way too glass cannon-y in that like it just has to hope and pray that you get to slam a 4-drop, and if you do, you win, and if you don't, you lose. Whereas like this deck between the Urza Saga getting to interact, you actually have a clock. You can pressure in multiple ways. Foundry Inspector can speed up your clock out of nowhere, meaning it has pseudo haste. Canoptech. I'm never going to be able to pronounce that right. But the Scarab Swarm, like that's disruption. Lodestone Golem is disruption. Sphere of Resistance is disruption. Tangle Wire is disruption. Like Sculpting Steel becomes copies X through whatever of each one of these things. This is 3 Cavern of Souls to like push through the fact that all of your shit is constructs. Like this is just a really, I don't know if the numbers are correct, but like this is a really well conceived list that has a clear intent of what it wants to do every game that it sits down at the table. And I can get behind it as like, if you wanted to be playing an Ancient Tomb City of Traders deck, I would get behind this one. Okay. Shout out to Eric Rakowski because the next one is Doomsday. Doomsday with the One Ring.
Eric, thank you for getting on an episode of Eternal Dirds and, letting everybody understand how this deck actually functions. Yeah, to the One Ring in your Doomsday deck. And, I mean, we're going to have to get Eric back on here. I mean, Eric, I know you're listening, bro. Chime in and tell us what the point of the One Ring is here. I mean, if you're playing Dark Ritual, I think you get to have access to the One Ring as a nice, easy way to just like bury your opponent on turn 2 if they don't have it.
I mean, also, if you get to that point in the game where you're able to cast Doomsday and the One Ring, like, isn't the game just kind of over? Like, the biggest, I feel like, and I might be wrong, the biggest hurdle you face as a Doomsday deck is you just cut your life in half when you cast a spell. Will your opponent kill you next turn? You know, otherwise you can probably get there.
Yeah, I mean, if you're getting to the point where you have 7 mana and can cast both Doomsday and the Ring,
True.
Like, you're winning that game anyway. But clearly it's to the One Ring, so the One Ring is not the plan. But the fact that you're playing 2 Cabal Ritual, you have Dark Ritual. I mean, you have like, in order to support the One Ring, like, it's on 3 Lotus Petal as well. It has all of the disruption that you could imagine from a Force of Will deck. But what the other thing that I like is that you theoretically could, if, like, let's say you
just chain One Rings after you Doomsday.
No. I was going to say, let's say I'm not a Doomsday pilot, it's a grain of salt. But like, if I was sleeving up this list and I had Doomsday in my my 60, I'm thinking to myself, if I can turbo a ring early, right? Let's say the ring is going to demand counter magic if they don't have it, right? And if they fight over it, great, they're not fighting over Doomsday. So that's one thing to be said first. But let's say it sticks, right? Now you have protection. You get to untap, and you could theoretically Doomsday and then work your way into your pile off of the ring as a free cantrip. So, like, factoring that into how you could build a pile from going, okay, on my turn 2, I'm going to Dark Ritual, I'm going to play One Ring, draw a card. Untap, I'm going to play my 3rd land, cast Doomsday. If I get it through, I'm now 2 cards deep into my pile because I can activate the ring.
Yeah, and I only have to draw 3 cards for you to win most of the time.
It's enough for you to win.
If you can draw 2 cards, you can probably get the rest out. So, because generally what your pile is going to look like in that scenario is a Cycler, right, and the Lion's Eye Diamond. You play the Lion's Eye Diamond, right? Untap, draw the Lion's Eye Diamond, play it, and then you're like, okay, cool. I'll crack the Lion's Eye Diamond. Draw 2 cards now because you've already drawn one with the ring that you already had out, right? Cycler, cycle. Okay, there are the other 2 cards of that 5-card pile, right? Oh, look at that. Cavern of Souls, Thassa's Oracle, I win.
One thing that I want to point out, too, which is a nod to the previous Sheoldred deck we looked at. The 3 Sheoldred, the Apocalypse, and the sideboard, I mean, that's been Doomsday stock since Sheoldred came out. And the fact that you can sort of
take the Doomsdays out, put those in,
you can move a little bit away from the combo to play a little bit grindier. And like, between the One Ring and Sheoldred, like, I mean, it's a lot of 4-drops, but they work hand in hand. And you can see, like, this deck is respecting the early game pressure out of the board, a singleton Fatal Push, but then also 2 Gut Shot. Like, I mean, we are respecting the Bowmasters, are we not?
Yeah.
I mean, if you're playing 2 Gut Shot in the board, you fucking mean it. And the fact that like if you're going to be able to board into Sheoldred and then like clear out the early pressure,
hours thinking about that, and you were like, no, it's time to do it.
Dude, when we were talking about before, where I was like, I was sleeving up days, I consciously thought the same thing. I was like, am I supposed to be just playing Gut Shot so that I can cantrip to like develop early on, and then still Gut Shot to like clear the initial threat on the cheap, so I can get through that time? It's like, it's the same thing, man. I mean, this is a combo deck. This deck doesn't need to get through development for this deck is personal tutor for fucking Doomsday, so it doesn't need to go too far. But like, it's part of the same deal. So
next I want to talk about what for me is my favorite deck on this list. It is an 80 card blue-black painter cast deck. So this is 8 cast plus painter plus Yorion plus Orcish Bowmasters.
I'm gonna share something with you. You want me to share something with you?
Yeah.
Everything about this deck is sweet, right? 2 Tezzeret Asian Ebolas, fucking sweet.
Yep.
80 card Yorion, like you said, sweet. Painter, sweet. 8 cast, sweet. All that said, fucking hate it, man. This thing is this particular version of I mean,
80 card version of using all of the cardboard.
Dude, it just, like, I get it's a lot of 4-ofs, But at the same time, it's a lot of 4-ofs without selection beyond Urza Saga, and it just feels unfocused. Like there's a singleton Beseju who endures in your 80 alongside. I mean, you're playing 80 cards, but you have one basic island and 4 Spire of Industry because you're a blue-black shell now. I mean,
Yep.
don't get me wrong. This deck is doing a lot of powerful things. Everything powerful about A-Cast is in here. Karn the Grier Creator gets a lot of free wins by itself. Having access to your entire sideboard as well, and then that stuff is stuff that you can loop with Emery. Fucking bonkers. But at the same time, I feel like this deck is beating up on all the decks. Like, this is an example of the arms race.
Yeah.
You know, we all just need more powerful stuff. If we're all doing the same thing, I just need to be doing more of it, and then I'll beat you because you're doing less of it. And as much as I want to be inspired by looking at this list, and it's the first time that I've seen Tezzeret Agent of Bolus, and that card gets me hard every time I look at it. But this for me, of all the lists, this one just ain't it, because I can't imagine opening my 7 and having part Oakhurst Bowmasters, part Emery, and being like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I'm just doing things, I guess,
That is the beauty of a non-brainstorm deck, Phil, is you have to evaluate your opener. You have to look at your deck and be like,
I get it, man. But like,
okay, yeah, this works.
Dude, I feel you. But like, if I open Karn the Creator next to Orcish Bowmasters, I'm just gonna be like, what the fuck am I trying? What am I doing? I'm just a things deck. I
just love everything about this deck. Like this is Zoix on MTGO, and this deck is just so cool because there's so much going on. There's some card count choices that I don't necessarily agree with, but I think the deck itself is massively cool.
Dude, let me caveat. It's got 3 One Ring. It's doing all of the stuff, but I mean, it's got 3 Painter Servant because one gets to go into the board for Karn. Like, This person has definitely thought through a bunch of the different angles in order to get to these numbers. But like, we're in this space. They're trading. Okay, we're on 3 One Ring, so we can cut on Thought Monitor. I get it. But we still have 2 Kappa Cannoneer, which is the same number that you had in your 8-cast 60. We're at 2 Psi, which is the same number that you had in your 8-cast 60. I'm not sure why Tezzeret Agent of Bolus is getting the nod here over the 4th One Ring or another Thought Monitor. Like,
I mean, honestly, I would take that out for Patchwork Automaton.
But at the same time, it's the coolest part of the deck. So how are you supposed to cut? How are you supposed to cut the coolest part of the deck?
Why would you even play black if you can't play Agent of Bolus, right? Yeah.
I mean, if you're gonna play 4 Spire of Industry, we gotta play a Tezzeret Agent of Bolus in the list. Come on.
Yep. All right,
This one ain't for me. It ain't for me.
Final deck, same guy actually. This is Zoix again on MTGO with 4-color Lorien Ring Control. So you get 4 Lorien revealed in here. This is a deck to me that is right up your alley, Phil. It's basically splashing black just for Orcish Bowmasters, but you're rocking 3 One Ring, which is where I think, like I said, that's where I think you want to be is at 3. The only thing that I look at here that I think like maybe they should think about is like you want a Teferi in this deck so that you can bounce your One Ring if you have to. But I mean, this deck is doing it all, doing all the control stuff. This is the exact opposite of the 4-color like Delighted Halfling control deck because you're not playing green at all in this deck. The thing that you're doing is more the One Ring and less Minsk and Boo.
So you're on the same number of One Ring. I'll say that this deck is a nice example of the iterations that people have been doing with Lorien Revealed. Lorien Revealed has just been adopted as like an obviously playable card. An instant speed uncounterable shuffle is just like really powerful. I know you and I have joked a bunch on this podcast where I'm like, dude, if they tomorrow printed blue instant shuffle your deck, draw a card, playable.
Yeah,
like I would be sleeving up a card like that, right? Because the access of being able to like ponder on turn 1, keep your best card, and then shuffle away the chafe, or brainstorm and then upkeep, shuffle away the chafe without having to expend your fetch. Like those types of like subtle interactions are really, really potent in the spots where you can pull them off. And this deck is I mean, I understand where this deck is going. I mean, being able to artificially inflate your blue count with Lorien revealed means that, okay, they're on 20 plus Lorien, plus a set of Lorien, which means you're way more likely to be able to hit your land drops. Now, it's a 3 planes, 4 island basics deck that's playing the Lorien revealed. So I'm not sure how we feel about that, particularly also because it's splashing black, and the means that it has to get black is 2 Underground Sea, the fetches, and the 4 Lorien revealed. So it has access to black, but it's trying to lean on basics. But then it's a 4 Bowmaster deck that is only playing 2 Underground Sea in order to suffice that black count.
Yeah.
Now, for what it's worth, like going into the additional splashes, Prismatic Ending already incentivizes that shit really hard. I play a lot of Prismatic Ending. I'm in 3 colors typically in order to be able to hit Narset and Teferi, even though those are never winning lines. But like the draw towards wanting to be able to splash the 4th color to be able to hit a Karn or now a One Ring or a Minsc and Boot, like it is a
the call to the dark side for sure.
It is the call to the dark side. It is a constant temptation where you're like, every time you lose to a 4-drop, you're like, if I had only splashed the additional color in order to maximize my Prismatic Endings, maybe this game is different. But then every time you do that, you always get punished by Wasteland, and you're like, why did I do this to myself? It's the constant tension that Prismatic Ending, applies to your deck building, where if anything less than 3 colors is a non-starter with Prismatic Ending. Anything not at 4 colors is not maximizing Prismatic Ending. So we're just constantly in that back and forth. This particular list, I think, like, I would explore the Lorien revealed even further, but like the other parts of this shell, I'm like a little bit iffy on. 2 4th Aerolingus, but only 4 Oakish Boarmasters as your creatures. I have tested a bunch of 4th Aerolingus, and I found that if you aren't playing a sufficient amount of creatures, the potential that you lose the Monarchy is pretty high. If the 4th Aerolingus isn't just used as a fireball, if you are using 4th Aerolingus or intend to use 4th Aerolingus as a value card any point in the early to mid game, to like just make a body, take the Monarchy, start going up a couple cards. If you lose the Monarchy and then are priced into a very subset number of creatures in your deck in order to try and get it back, they will be easier to fight over because they have no other targets for the removal. And it's just going to be really difficult for you to like break through to get that Monarchy back. And the Monarchy snowballs really hard. So you could end up losing a lot of games to the Monarchy that you introduced. So like, you have to keep that in mind in a 4th Aerolingus control deck that's not focused on creatures or not biased a lot heavily towards creatures, that, not to introduce the Monarchy to the game if you don't have it, effectively locked up or at parity and clearly pull ahead to the point where it's insurmountable. So this deck is also an example. I feel like it's playing Bowmasters because it's the new fun thing, and you are incentivized to go to a 4th color anyway for Prismatic Ending. So I think it's not starting at Bowmasters and then thinking, where do I go from here? It built the rest of the deck first and was like, oh, well, if I want the 4th color and I'm moving into black anyway, I might as well play Bowmasters because it's the most powerful thing to be doing in the format at the moment. And then in the board, I also get access to Plague Engineer to deal with opposing Orcus Bowmasters, which is really important right now. So
can we talk about the most rude card in this deck?
Arid Mesa?
No. Ruination. Like,
I mean, yeah. Like,
what are you doing?
Yeah. Well, I mean, look at the deck list, bro. It's a 4 island, 3 plains deck.
Yeah. But it's just funny because it is a 4-color deck that's like, Ruination.
Let's be real. This is not a 4-color deck. This is a blue-white splash red deck.
Yeah,
that
actually
to have
wants
black
to play
because Prismatic
Bowmasters.
Ending lets you have it. And then Lorien Revealed gives you additional pseudo fetch lands for your black sources.
Sure.
Like, this is not a 4-color deck. Like, if you said it's written as 4-color Lorien Ring Control, it's not. It's blue-white XX Lorien Ring Control.
Yeah.
And anything less than
style
that,
of deck I could never. I was talking to my buddy Dave the other day. I could never play the style of deck in Legacy. I've tried to play Miracles, especially when Miracles was was the hot deck to play. I played it a couple times, and it's absolutely not my style. I hate to be the person answering questions. I'd rather be constantly asking them. So a deck like this, it's just so much work for me to be like, okay, what am I going to see at my LGS this week? Tweak here, tweak there. And that's what you do, obviously. But I like to just be like, okay, I've got my 8-cast list or I've got my Death Shadow list. Tweak a card here or there because I'm feeling it, not because I have to really think about like what I saw last week or like what the trends are in the format. And to me, like a deck like this is it's cool, but I do not want to have to decide if Stern Scolding is the card I want to be playing right now in my control deck. You know,
I can answer that question for you. It's not the card that you want to be
it's
playing
not.
in your control deck.
But you had to learn that because you played it. You know,
I did. I put it through the testing, and it goes back to the same thing of that the discussion about like having to be able to play through development. Your conditional 1-mana counter magic cards, if they don't have a way to both interact with your opponent to stop what they are doing, but like because you need to work through development, the reason that like Spell Pierce still finds its way into a couple of decks is because Spell Pierce can be used both reactively and proactively. You can use it to protect your stuff that you're trying to stick through, where Stern Scolding is not going to help you push through your own stuff, and that's a huge difference. It's similar to like Spell Snare. Like we're not in a counterspell format, right? So like Spell Snare is not theoretically going to be able to help you push through your shit. But Spell Pierce can, and that's why Spell Pierce I still think gets the nod in reasonable spots where like the other playing
what's it called Flusterstorm for a while as well.
I was playing Flusterstorm, but like to be fair, like Flusterstorm was specifically because I was also playing a very heavy Snapcaster list.
Yeah,
and Snapcaster elevates the power of Flusterstorm.
Got it.
I was also playing Flusterstorm, like experimenting as people were like still figuring stuff out. Like once Bowmasters hit, Thoughtseize went up like starkly in terms of how much it was showing up. So like Flusterstorm was more interesting in that environment. Before the EI ban, like EI was like everywhere. So it's like Flusterstorm was very easy to catch those things because they have to play at sorcery speed and you're like great flush to you. I don't think that's necessarily where you want to be now, particularly because so much of the power level of the format post LOTR is in Bowmasters and One Ring, and then One Ring incentivize
not instants and sorcery specifically.
It's in permanence. I think that like to what you were saying before about how you wouldn't want to be playing this deck, I don't think I would either. And I'll close with this thought on control lists. Part of our 101 series, you've done a bunch of those videos. Anybody who hasn't checked those out yet, like check out all those, all the lists he's done. Zach has done one on Infect. We recently did one with Doomsday where we referenced Eric. Thank you again for doing that. Zach has done an 8-cast video and a Cephalid Breakfast video. All those lists are on Moxfield. So plug that right now.
Eternal Dirtles is proud to be sponsored by Moxfield. Moxfield is the best Magic the Gathering deck building website on the internet. You can create, share, and find decks from Commander to Legacy and even fan-supported formats like Pre-Modern and Old School. You can see all of our decks on our Moxfield. Follow the links below to stay tuned. Yep.
And so part of that 101 series, the only deck that I can speak formidably on really is Miracles. And when Zach was saying, hey, Phil, you really need to like write out the script for Miracles as a way to articulate like, okay, well, what makes the deck Miracles as opposed to any of the other decks that would be conceived as control, blue, white, X control, Jeskai control, 4-color control, like what is the difference between the control list versus the Miracles list? And in my mind, the reason why I'm opposed to so many of like the 3-drop, like the Firewalkers between Narset and Teferi, like all that shit just always feels so clunky to me. And it's because my inclination when I'm playing Miracles, the difference between Miracles and all of the other control lists is that the control lists focus on the board. Like they're very much like, I want to play more like a prison-ish style deck where my Planeswalkers are locking out some amount of the table. I'm playing like some Supreme Verdicts and spot removal, and I'm trying to 1-for-1 and then go up on these prison pieces and lock you out, and then eventually snowball and run away with the game with whatever my win condition of choice is. Whereas Miracles is less focused on, I mean, it has the nod of Terminus, but it's less focused on what's happening on the board and more focused on what's happening on the top of the libraries. Like the way that Jeskai Control and Blue, White, X and 4-color, they're all focused on the table. Whereas Miracles is focused on the libraries. And that, in my mind, is like the very specific difference between the like Haymaker, like knock you out in single punch style control lists that we see in 4-color Pile and 4-color Control with Minsc and Boo, and what we saw with Staff of the Storyteller list before Lord of the Rings, and Miracles, which focuses way more on, like, in my view, like Mystic Sanctuary, Counterbalance, predict shenanigans with all of that stuff. I play a lot of Unexpectedly Absent to pair with all of those things. Like it really wants to control the top of the opponent's library and the top of like the player's library, the Miracle player library. So stuff like Portent being able to go on both directions, a lot of extra additional cantrips in order to control the card flow of what's on top of your deck when, like manipulating the top of your deck as a way to control the table is the lens that I view Miracles through.
Okay.
And so when I look at something like this, Miracles, in my mind, still gets to be a proactive control deck because you can build. You can sit down every game knowing that even if it's not good in the matchup, if you don't know in the dark, you're still going to be like, I want to establish counterbalance. Like the way that I win this game is I establish a counterbalance in some way, and then I pair that with either a Jace the Mind Sculptor or a way that I'm looping Mystic Sanctuary in some fashion. But like it is revolving around counterbalance as the lock piece that the opponent has to care about, and then you get to dance around them dancing around your counterbalance as ways to like leverage advantage and then put yourself into a position to win the game. Whereas the control decks are slamming a bunch of haymakers and just like good cards on rate, which is different. Yeah. It's not playing like Miracles plays a positional game where 4-color control or Jeskai control, the other ones, plays a haymaker game that leverages cards that are pound for pound better on raw rate, but don't necessarily let you maneuver in tricky positions as fluidly. So something like this deck that we're looking at, this deck, and the reason why I think you look at it and are like, this isn't for me, is that if you were to sit down with this deck and open it up, I couldn't tell you what it wants to do in the first 4 turns of any given game. If you sat down in the dark, it would have to just go, I need to line up my interaction pieces and hope that that's good enough. And then I will slam the One Ring that will run away with the game or give me enough time to get to the stage where I have 4th Aerolingus. And it's packing a lot of disruption, a lot of counter magic between 2 Stern Scolding, 2 Force Negation, all the Force of Wills, 2 Supreme Verdict to close the board. Orcus Bowmasters puts a lot of bodies on the table to like stall the game down a little bit so you can get to the One Ring portion of the game. Lorien Revealed is supposed to ensure that you hit your land drops all the way up on a 20+4 split. So like it looks really good in terms of like assuming that the interaction is able to line up an exchange. The One Ring is powerful enough that it should be able to close the door. But at the same time, like going in thinking, okay, I just need to line up my answers and stick a One Ring, lining up your answers, like just skipping over that idea. The format is too wide to assume that your answers will just get to line up in a way that your opponent doesn't get to just maneuver around you. And I think that not having that that proactive game to even as a control deck, like if you look at like the Teferi Narsec style control decks, they're like, I want to go 1-2 punch, and then slam one of these walkers and like blank a bunch of your cards and then snowball from there. But like those decks are on like 3 Narset or 4 Narset, 4 Teferi, plus some number of additional planeswalkers on top of that. Like they are really, really, really dense at the 3-drop slot because they're like, my first 2 turns are literally exchanging whatever cardboard I can exchange and then slamming a 3-drop. That's how I win the game. Yeah. This one on only 3 One Rings, it looks way more anemic to me. And so the antithesis of where you're at, it puts a lot of pressure on Bowmasters to get, as a proactive piece of cardboard, to get you through that development, to get to the stages where you can play the One Ring. The problem with that, though, is that you're a very heavy basic land deck that in order to play the Bowmasters, you have to expose your Underground Sea. And if you expose your Underground Sea and then get wasted, it's going to set you back to getting to your plan. So it just feels like it's a bunch of control cards that are powerful enough to score wins, but not necessarily a cohesively focused idea of what it wants to do sitting down at the table. And I think that that's where you and I both have a sort of like, pull away.
There's a trepidation, when we look,
there's a trepidation looking at this list, and I think it revolves around that idea where you're like, you're looking at the deck list going, what am I supposed to do? What am I trying to do? And I don't know if this deck knows. Maybe it does. Maybe the pilot has put in a bunch of reps and would be able to tell. But at the same time, like I agree with you. This is not the kind of control deck that I would want to build. And I also wanted to just say that like we will also be teasing the Miracles 101, where we're going to go into a little bit of like that. Yeah.
And I was like, and I like after that explanation, I think we're all very much looking forward to you doing the Miracles 101 because there's obviously a lot to share.
There's a lot to share, and it's just like I think it's just because since Miracles is not a tier deck in like remotely close to any part of the like actual tier that you would consider like as a deck that you have to respect in any meaningful way if you were to go to a tournament, like it's not, and you shouldn't. But the difference between like Miracles as an archetype and Control as an archetype being co-opted as like pseudo the same thing, particularly because some Control like 4-color pile lists play like 1 or 2 Terminus as like their sweeper of choice because they'll play like 1 or 2 Mystic Sanctuary and like that interaction is cool. I think like that's taking some Miracle technology and co-opting it into the pile
deck that is not Miracles
archetype, but it is not meant to maximize that. It's just a tool that it's giving itself access to, but like it will find itself in positions where the Terminus is clunking up their hand, or the Mystic Sanctuary isn't maximized because their mana base isn't optimized to ensure that it hits its maximum potential. Whereas Miracles is focused really, really hard on that, to the point where it's actually making concessions in terms of raw power level to make those sort of synergies happen. And, you know, we'll get into that into the 101, but I think like this is a nice deck to like show the example of the differences between those two kinds of archetypes, because Miracles is really in its own lane versus the control shells that we know at post War of the Spark that gave us all of these really, really powerful snowbally planeswalkers that sort of created a new prison control-y style archetype on its own. But then there wasn't really a delineation between the two archetypes because Miracles sort of fell off the map post top ban and it's like never really established itself after that. But like they should be two distinct archetypes in the way that 8-cast and Painter are different archetypes, even though they use a lot of similar technology. The way that they play the game out is very different. If you sit down with 8-cast Painter versus 8-cast like Psy strategy that's not playing a combo finish, the way that you navigate those games are going to be very different. And that's very similar to how you would navigate with a 4-color pile list versus a Miracles list. So we'll get into that to the 101. That's the teaser. But to wrap up, the One Ring is really powerful. It's definitely a legacy player. I think that it's a much bigger player in Modern because Modern doesn't have the tools that we have in Legacy, and the tools that we have in Legacy, I actually think are on power level with One Ring, and in some cases, like Minsc and Boo, pound for pound better than One Ring. And so, in that regard, if the One Ring's life time in Modern is going to be short-lived till the end of the year, and then potentially clip a ban after that, I don't think the One Ring is going to go anywhere in Legacy. I think it's just another part of the format, and we'll have access
more
to the
people from Modern can flash into to Legacy after that gets banned, right?
And that would be sweet, right? Like if One Ring gets banned and then people spend all their money on acquiring One Rings and then want to use that to just get into the format, a lot of these decks that like are playing the One Ring aren't necessarily like in the really expensive area of the format. Like, I mean,
the Painter deck was like the Painter deck's under $2,000.
The Painter deck's on no duels. This 4-color list that we're looking at, like, it is 4-color that's playing 2 Underground Sea, 2 Tundra, and 2 Volcanic Island, but like you could very easily get away with not playing one of either of the splashes and just do something different. Like, there's a lot of flexibility with a list like this, but it's primarily on basics. You could probably get away with like a pair of duels or a trio of duels.
Sunken Hollow or something like that until you can afford an Underground Sea,
Yeah, I
can
can't
get it with
advocate
Lorien
for that,
Revealed,
But I can also, like, I mean, we were looking at like the mono blacklist, like between Rings and Sheoldreds, like those are two relatively new cards. The stuff around the rest of the mono black shell is not expensive. Like Ancient Tombs just got reprinted. Not all of those decks are playing City of Traders if they're playing any of City of Traders. So like the Ancient Tombs won't really set you back in the same way that duels will. And if you already have the One Rings and you had some number of Sheoldreds as maybe additional role players, like that's an easy deck to get into. So I think like the One Ring I don't think is going anywhere in Legacy. So if players want to play the One Ring, they'll have a format to do it in. If that isn't Modern going long term. So I think like it's not the last time we've seen Lord of the Rings controlling tables.
Anyhow, that does it for us this week, everybody. Thank you so much for watching. Please remember, like, share, subscribe, all that stuff. Mostly like and comment if you can. The last video did really well, and we're hoping this one does well too. We are only 70 people away from getting to monetization for YouTube, so it really helps if you any of that stuff that you do. But obviously,
come on,
if you subscribe, that definitely helps.
Call 70 of your friends. We all have 70 friends.
We all have 70 friends.
Just call your 70 friends. Tell them to smash the subscribe button. Come on,
get them. All right, have a good one, everyone. Hey, thanks so much for watching, and check out this playlist of all of our single card strategies. And if you want, go ahead and subscribe. That would help so much. We're so close to monetization. Help us out.